Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Enid Tsui, author of Art in Hong Kong, a book recently published as part of the Hot Topics in the Art World series by Lund Humphries and Sotheby's Institute of Art. The book offers a fascinating analysis of the history, current status, and possible future of Hong Kong as an international art hub. I speak to Enid about her experiences as a journalist and her current role as the arts editor for the South China Morning Post. I ask her about why she felt now was an important time to be writing this book on art in Hong Kong. We chat about her thoughts on the emergence of Art Basel Hong Kong, which started in 2012, along with the opening of the Museum M+ in 2021, to which she dedicates a whole chapter in her book. We talk about the artists of Hong Kong, and she delves into some of their stories, along with where she sees the future of Hong Kong's art scene, and so much more. Thank you, Enid, for coming on the podcast, and to Lund Humphries for the collaboration. Before we dive into the episode, I want to take a minute of your time to mention that All About Art is on Patreon. We are mostly volunteer-led, but in order to cover running costs and other expenses, we make it possible for our lovely listeners to support us, ranging from £1 a month to the price of an oat latte a month, or on the higher end, the price of a Sunday brunch per month, depending on the tier you want to choose. If every person who listens to the podcast signed up for the £1 tier on our Patreon, we would be able to sustain the podcast while also having scope to produce episodes more frequently and expand our activities in demystifying the professional arts sector. So, if you want to receive early access to episodes and behind-the-scenes content, maybe you want to get some merch, or if you just love what we do and want to support us, I would be thrilled if you considered signing up. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes. Also, thank you to our sponsors at Synergy Associates, the Art World Tech Gurus, for supporting this episode's production at their clubhouse on Pall Mall. You can find more about Synergy and their facilities in the show notes. And now, on to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Enid. To start us off, I would love for you to tell listeners about your background. You were originally a financial journalist, but you also have a master's degree in art history. So can you tell me more about that progression and also how you developed your interest in the arts?
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Alexandra. My career did pivot after a long stretch of writing and editing stories about companies and markets. In 2009, I was still working for the Financial Times, and I had just moved back to the Hong Kong office after a few years in London. Those were heady days in Hong Kong, and everything seemed to be on an upward trajectory. Because during the global financial crisis that had just ended around then, in 2009, China unleashed a massive economic stimulus program to avoid a slowdown. So a lot of the FT stories I wrote back then had to do with the broad effects of some of that money flowing into various regional markets, including the art market. As the Asia Companies and Markets editor and later the Hong Kong correspondent, I wrote one story after another about new auction records in traditional Chinese works of art and in 20th and 21st century Chinese and Asian art. A bubble was definitely forming. It was a crazy time with a crazy amount of speculation and flipping. It was not a coincidence that the other big story that I followed back then was Macau, which is next to Hong Kong, overtaking Las Vegas as the world's biggest gambling center.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
So besides the flashing dollar signs, I also had the opportunity to interview a few artists for the FT Weekend section. So people like the Chinese artist Yuan Minjun, who is still closely associated with the cynical realism school that made contemporary Chinese art a big phenomenon in the 1990s and 2000s. And I met people like Claire Tsui of the Asian Art Archive in Hong Kong, who really believes that art can often lead to a more empathetic, nuanced, and varied understanding of history. So, after many years of poring through companies' results, looking at markets data on the Bloomberg terminal, speaking to people in the C-suite, all of which I still enjoy doing occasionally, the art world was a sort of kaleidoscopic, rainbow-colored revelation. And to be perfectly honest, I also realized how few people were writing about this explosion of creativity in Asia and about the Asian art market generally. Of course, the FT has a wonderful art section, but it doesn't have a dedicated team in Asia. So after nearly a decade of working for the Pink Paper, I started writing for the art section of the South China Morning Post, which is where I am still. Luckily for me, Kevin Kwong, the then arts editor of the South China Morning Post, was familiar with my art market coverage in the FT, and I have to thank him for giving me a job that was focused more on writing about non-market stuff like exhibitions and interviewing artists. So as a rookie art writer, which I definitely was back then, I mostly relied on interviews with curators and artists and what they told me about the art, about the exhibitions. And later in 2019, I took a year off to go back to university. That's when I studied for a master's in art history.
Oh, wow. So much later then. Okay.
I did some art history as an undergrad, but I sorely needed a top-up. It was really hard work, but I'm so glad I did it. After I graduated, I returned to the SCMP as the arts editor. When it comes to writing about art, I returned to the job, I think, better equipped and more confident with my own visual analysis and connections with art history. But I still insist I'm not an art critic. I am an art journalist. I do review exhibitions from the perspective of whether they deliver what they promise to deliver, perhaps.
Amazing. I mean, you just mentioned that you are the arts editor for the South China Morning Post, and you oversee the arts coverage for the newspaper. So in speaking about your job, what does your day-to-day look like, and how do you choose what to cover and what angle you take when reporting?
My newspaper has changed a lot since it was founded in 1903, mainly to serve the British colonial community and the English-speaking elite in Hong Kong. Like many print publications around the world, our circulation today is largely online, though we do still have a printed daily newspaper in Hong Kong. The reason I bring this up is because when I decide on coverage, on who to write for, I consider the fact that most of our readers online are actually in North America and in Southeast Asia. But the loyal local readers in Hong Kong will, of course, always be one of our key markets. So I commission everything from weekend must-sees in Hong Kong for our local readers to landmark exhibitions of Asian artists or artists of Asian descent in major institutions around the world. So this week, I've edited a piece on the British-Singaporean artist Kim Lim, who has a major retrospective at the National Gallery Singapore, for example. And I tend to go for topics and artists that other publications are less likely to be interested in. So our pieces are always written from a Hong Kong or Chinese or Asian perspective. And it's absolutely core to our coverage that we help our readers understand that there's a lot more to art history than the best-known male Chinese, European, and American artists who dominate textbooks and museums. I also oversee our coverage of the performing arts, and I work with a regular team of music and dance reviewers. And for those, we do focus on what's happening in Hong Kong, though increasingly, thanks to more convenient transport links, we also keep an eye on shows in neighboring cities such as Macau, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. So all these cities and Hong Kong are today collectively called the Greater Bay Area of China. And that's something that I touch upon in my book.
That actually is a perfect segue into my next question, because we are recording this episode to celebrate or to coincide a little bit with the publication of your book, Art in Hong Kong, Portrait of a City in Flux. It's the latest in a series called Hot Topics in the Art World, published by Lund Humphries and Sotheby's Institute of Art. It focuses on not only the history of Hong Kong as an international art hub, but also its current status and the future possibilities of the city. There would be too much to cover in this episode if we talked about all of the facets that your book offers, and I do want to encourage people to actually go and buy and read the book as well. So I wanted to start off with the first group of people you named in your acknowledgements in the beginning, the artists of Hong Kong. I think speaking about their importance would be a good place to start.
I feel extremely lucky and honored to stand on the shoulders of artists. And there are two mainstream ideas about Hong Kong generally that I want to challenge in the book. And the first is that Hong Kong is just a market for art and not a city with a great art tradition. The other idea that I want to challenge is that after the 2019 protests in Hong Kong, there are people who think that Hong Kong is dead. And there are people who insist that Hong Kong has never had it so good. The extreme and binary verdicts on Hong Kong in the last few years is something that I want to challenge because reality, of course, lies in between. But back to the artists. I thought that the best way and hopefully a more interesting way of introducing Hong Kong at the beginning of the book is to see it through the eyes of one artist, Jaffa Lam. Jaffa moved from mainland China to British colonial Hong Kong as a child and suffered some tough years because the two places were so different. The difference extended to what she was encouraged to do in art school in Hong Kong. She wanted to devote herself to traditional Chinese calligraphy. But Hong Kong, before its 1997 handover to China, was all about establishing a unique identity of its own. So she couldn't really fit in. Then in 2003, we had the outbreak of SARS, the virus that hit Hong Kong really hard, sort of an early version of COVID-19. She discovered then that all she wanted to do was to make public, collaborative sculptures that said something about real society. Those works rarely sell, and so she was often broke and in despair. But her luck finally changed in recent years after Hong Kong's status as a contemporary art center solidifies, and there's now growing interest in the work of female artists using unconventional methods. Hers is a unique story, but also one that closely tracks the development of Hong Kong's art scene.
I guess it was also kind of done in a time, like the timeline fit very much, as you just said, it tracks the development of Hong Kong's art scene. And when I was reading it, because I got the privilege of reading a little bit earlier than others in order to record this episode, I found it so riveting when I was reading Jaffa Lam's story. And I just felt like, you know, when you tell historical and also maybe like a little bit economical and sort of political narratives through, as you say, the eyes of an artist and the artist's experience, I just found that so, it just took me with her on her journey. And I really enjoyed that. Why do you feel like now, in 2025, it was an important time to be writing this book on art in Hong Kong?
As I mentioned briefly before, there are very opposite opinions on Hong Kong these days. After the 2019 protests and the 2020 introduction of national security law. So there are those who insist that the city is dead because of the new censorship regime related to NSL, as we call it, National Security Law, and also because of how the city was basically cut off from the rest of the world for 3 years during its self-imposed isolation in the pandemic. And there are those who insist Hong Kong has never had it so good because the government is investing heavily in the arts and culture. And the city is now part of this new Greater Bay Area of China, which promises more cultural exchanges with neighboring countries and one day, hopefully, a booming tech-driven economy. So I think a book about Hong Kong today will be quite useful to anyone with a stake in its art scene or anyone who's interested in how the city is doing. In just 28,000 words, I cover the history of the city's art scene going back to the 19th century, and I also give an update on what has been banned under the new laws and other things that art practitioners need to be aware of in Hong Kong today, including new opportunities, new organizations, and funding schemes. And a lot of people around the world do have a stake in Hong Kong, which remains an open and cosmopolitan city. It is still Asia's biggest art market by value, and auction houses like Christie's, Sotheby's, and Phillips have just opened massive new headquarters in the city. And Art Basel continues to have its flagship Asia Fair in Hong Kong each spring.
Well, and on that note, I would actually love to hear your thoughts on the emergence of Art Basel Hong Kong. I think the first version of the Hong Kong iteration happened in 2012, and new museums opening, such as, is it M+, is that how I would pronounce it, which opened in 2021, and to which you dedicate a whole chapter in your book.
You're absolutely right to suggest that these were two seminal moments for Hong Kong's art scene. An earlier art fair called Art Hong Kong was founded in 2008 and did really well on capturing that great inflow of Chinese money I mentioned earlier. And a surge of interest in contemporary art was also happening across Asia. That fair did so well that Art Basel bought it in 2012 and renamed it Art Basel Hong Kong in 2013.
Oh, okay.
So, Art Basel, the world's biggest brand in contemporary art fairs, really did help bring international collectors and institutions and galleries to the city for the first time on a regular basis. Many of the international galleries that have a permanent branch in Hong Kong today, such as Gagosian, White Cube, Peloton, they first tested the waters by exhibiting in either Art HK or Art Basel Hong Kong. The fair's success and the continued growth of the auction market since 1973, that's when the first auction took place in Hong Kong, does mean that a lot of people think of Hong Kong as just a market for art. But of course, I want to remind people of the many generations of artists who lived and worked in Hong Kong well before the art fairs. Now, M+, of course Hong Kong had museums before M+ opened in 2021. But this is a different kind of museum from anything that existed in Hong Kong before, or really anything that existed in the world, in a way. Because it's a large museum with a collection spanning visual arts, architecture, design, and films. And it is the first institution built to create a new international modern and contemporary cultural history with its roots in Hong Kong that is not based on any one national perspective. The flagship SIG collection, so this is a collection of some of the most important works of art from contemporary China that was donated to M+ by the Swiss collector Uli Sig. This flagship collection includes a lot of pieces that cannot be shown in mainland China today because of censorship. Pieces by Ai Weiwei and paintings by artists such as Wang Guangyi that bring Mao Zedong's iconic portrait to the level of the ordinary, as the museum says. And so even though there is concern about the new national security-related censorship in Hong Kong, the city remains far freer than mainland China across the border. But M+ is not just about contemporary Chinese art, as I mentioned. And I often go for film screenings, for talks by some of the world's biggest names in art, and also by emerging artists and curators. There's always something worth seeing there, and it's located in the new West Kowloon Cultural District, which also has a Hong Kong Palace Museum and performing arts venues. So in the book, in this chapter about M+, I described the dramatic moment when it first opened in 2021 to a purely local crowd because it was during the pandemic. Hong Kong's borders were still shut. And it was an amazing moment. And a lot of people were deeply moved by it because it's taken a long time for the museum to be built and for it to open. And there was a lot of expectations. And I remember the first time I saw the first exhibitions and I was blown away. But there were also those who were not happy with the museum at all. It was shortly after the introduction of the national security law, and there were local politicians who decided to attack M+ on what they call anti-China art. Art by Ai Weiwei, art featuring, the Mao Zedong portraits that I mentioned, they thought should be thrown out. How dare this Hong Kong museum show such art? There is now, of course, another problem for M+. It's running out of cash. The government will not give it any more money directly, but it does have land to sell to property developers in the near future. So at the moment, it seems to be doing okay existing on bank loans. So I think M+ opened at a really interesting time in Hong Kong, a really tense time in Hong Kong. And whether the museum can achieve its very important objectives will depend on how it navigates the politics as well as, its finance.
I have a penultimate question, and I guess that kind of ties into maybe like the future of M+, but also you do cover this in greater depth in the final chapter of your book. But where do you see the future of Hong Kong's art scene?
I think a lot of great art is being made in Hong Kong now, perhaps because we are all going through this period of doubt and instability. And after all, Hong Kong has always, as I explain in the book, it has always inhabited this uncomfortable, awkward spot between China and the rest of the world. And today, as peace becomes more perilous and friction between the big powers shows itself in just about every newspaper front page you see, the art in Hong Kong, the art that's seen, the art that's being made, the art that's being shown is, I think, getting more and more universally relevant. And on a practical front, as long as China's economy continues to grow, there's a slowdown at the moment, but China remains the world's second largest economy. Hong Kong's art market will remain one of the biggest in the world because it has no tax on art, it has great logistics, and a unique geographic location, which means that it's very close to mainland China, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia. And that's why a lot of the region's collectors continue to come to the city to buy art, to see art.
I have one final question, and it's not related to Hong Kong. Well, my question isn't, your answer might be. And it's one that I ask all of my guests here on All About Art. If you could pick one artist from art history to have dinner with, who would it be and why?
My answer is indeed unrelated to Hong Kong. I'd love to have dinner with Tang Chang. He was a Thai artist of Chinese ancestry. He died in 1990. I have done quite a bit of research on his life and practice for my MA thesis and also for a paper I wrote later in the World Art Journal. His art typifies the way Asian art is often lumped in with unrelated Western developments and described by Western critics as derivative. He was a total eccentric. He never set foot outside Thailand, and he left behind this large archive of amazing art that he made with his own body. And also he was a poet as well. And he left behind a lot of works that can be, I suppose, described as concrete poetry. It's really amazing to see how he's, in recent years, slowly becoming recognized. And yes, it would be amazing to meet him in this fantasy dinner.
Yeah. So you said he passed away in 1990.
Yes. So
okay, and he's only now like basically 30 years, 35 years down the line, gaining more recognition.
Yes, I mean, in his home country, Thailand, of course, he has always been well known. But I think for a long period of time, he was better known as a poet than an artist who made this huge archive of oil paintings and also work on paper.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. Enid, that concludes my questions, and thus that also concludes the episode on art in Hong Kong. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today on your very brief visit to London.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.